The bitter winter wind cut through her thin jacket as she pulled her small daughter closer, trying to shield the child from the cold under the bus stop shelter. Their breath formed tiny clouds in the freezing air, and the little girl's stomach growled loudly enough for both to hear. It had been 3 days since they'd had a proper meal, surviving only on crackers and water from a nearby church's food pantry. "Mama, I'm hungry," the little girl whispered, her big brown eyes looking up with trust that somehow her mother would make everything okay. Those eyes, once bright with childhood joy, now carried a haunting hollowness that broke her mother's heart each time she looked into them. Just 6 months ago, they'd had a home. A modest 2-bedroom apartment filled with the sounds of laughter and the smell of home-cooked meals. She'd worked as a music teacher at the local elementary school, living paycheck to paycheck, but managing to keep her daughter fed, clothed, and happy. Then came the layoffs, budget cuts, they said. Her position was non-essential. She'd tried everything, sent out hundreds of job applications, called every contact she had, even attempted to sell her beloved guitar. But in this economy, everyone was struggling. The savings disappeared faster than she could have imagined, eaten up by rent, utilities, and groceries. When the eviction notice came, they'd moved into her old car, but even that was gone now, sold to pay for her daughter's emergency room visit when she developed a dangerous fever. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed to mock their dire situation. Around them, people hurried past, wrapped in warm coats, heading home to their families and warm dinners. Some averted their eyes, others gave pitying glances, but most simply didn't notice them at all. She pulled out their last remaining possession of value, a small photo album. Inside were pictures of happier times, her daughter's first steps, their trip to the beach last summer, the school musical where she'd led her students in a performance that had the whole audience on their feet. Her fingers traced the edges of the photos as tears threatened to fall. But she couldn't cry. Not now. Not when her baby needed her to be strong. Tomorrow, she would have to swallow her pride and do something she'd never imagined herself doing. The church that had been giving them food also ran a daycare program. She would leave her daughter there for a few hours and find a busy street corner. Her voice had once earned her a music scholarship to college, now it would have to earn them their next meal. As night fell and the temperature dropped further, she gathered their few belongings and headed toward the shelter, praying they would find space tonight. Her daughter had fallen asleep against her shoulder, trustingly peaceful despite their circumstances. Looking at her child's innocent face, she made a silent promise. Somehow, some way, she would find a path out of this nightmare. She had to, not just for herself, but for the precious life that depended on her. The streets were quieting now, shops closing their doors, the last commuters rushing to catch their trains home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and perhaps, though she hardly dared to hope, a chance to change their story. For now, she held her daughter close, their hearts beating as one, two souls against the world, waiting for dawn to break on what she prayed would be a better day. The morning sun had barely risen when she walked through the doors of the local church's daycare center. Her daughter clung tightly to her hand, eyes wide with uncertainty in the unfamiliar space. The kind-faced volunteer at the desk greeted them warmly, and slowly her little one's grip began to loosen. "We'll take good care of her," the volunteer assured, gesturing toward a room filled with children's laughter and colorful toys. "She'll have lunch and snacks, and there are other kids her age to play with." The words brought both relief and a sharp pang of guilt. Her child would eat today, but only through the kindness of strangers. After countless kisses and promises to return soon, she walked out of the daycare, her heart heavy but her determination stronger than ever. She'd spotted a busy intersection near the shopping district yesterday, the perfect place for what she needed to do. Her feet carried her there automatically while her mind wandered back to happier times. She remembered standing on stage in college, performing in front of hundreds, her voice carrying to the rafters. Back then, music had been her dream, her passion, her ticket to a better life. Now it would become her survival tool. The irony wasn't lost on her. Finding a spot near the corner where foot traffic was heaviest, she took a deep breath. The morning rush was in full swing, business people hurrying to their offices, shop workers heading to their shifts, delivery trucks making their rounds. She closed her eyes, trying to gather her courage. The first note came out shakily, barely audible above the street noise. But as she continued, her voice grew stronger, remembering years of training. She chose songs everyone knew, old classics, popular ballads, timeless melodies that spoke of love, hope, and resilience. Her voice soared above the traffic noise, carrying emotion that came straight from her soul. The first few people walked past without a glance. Others looked but quickly turned away. Still, she sang on. A woman stopped briefly, dropped some coins in the empty cup she'd placed on the ground, and hurried away. The coins barely made a sound as they fell, but to her, they rang like church bells, proof that maybe, just maybe, this crazy plan could work. As the morning wore on, more people stopped to listen. An elderly man stood for 3 full songs, tears in his eyes. A group of teenagers filmed her with their phones, swaying to the music. A street vendor brought her a hot coffee, refusing payment. "Your voice makes my customers stay longer," he said with a kind smile. The sun climbed higher and her throat grew dry, but she kept singing. Every coin, every dollar that landed in her cup meant another meal for her daughter. Pride had no place in a mother's love. She would sing until her voice gave out if that's what it took. By early afternoon, her feet ached from standing and her voice was growing hoarse. But the cup held enough for a few days' worth of food, and more importantly, she'd discovered something valuable. She still had something to offer the world. Her talent hadn't disappeared with her job and home. It had just been waiting for the moment when she needed it most. As she prepared to take a break, a sleek black car caught her attention as it slowed near her corner. The tinted window rolled down, and the driver leaned out, listening. She chose that moment to pour her heart into an old soul classic, one about never giving up hope. Little did she know, this particular song, at this particular moment, would change everything. The car pulled over to the curb, its engine purring quietly. Her heart raced. Something told her this wasn't just another passerby dropping spare change. As the driver's door opened, she kept singing, putting every ounce of emotion she had left into the final verses. Sometimes, she would later reflect, life's biggest moments come disguised as ordinary days, and hope appears just when you think you've used the last of it. The luxury car's engine fell silent as a well-dressed businessman stepped out. Her voice trailed off as he approached, his expression unreadable behind designer sunglasses. She braced herself. Experience had taught her that people in expensive suits rarely brought good news to those singing on street corners. "Don't stop," he said softly, removing his sunglasses. "That song, it was my mother's favorite." His eyes held a warmth that surprised her, and somehow she found herself continuing the melody. As she sang, he listened intently, head slightly tilted, as if hearing something beyond just the words and music. The evening rush-hour traffic flowed around them, but in that moment, it felt like they stood in their own pocket of stillness. When the last note faded, he didn't immediately speak. Instead, he looked at her carefully, noting her worn but clean clothes, the quiet dignity in her posture despite her circumstances. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, his tone gentle but direct. There was no pity in his voice, just genuine curiosity. She hesitated, wondering how much to share with a stranger, even one who seemed kind. 3 days, she answered finally, her throat dry from singing. "I used to teach music before." She gestured vaguely at her cup of coins, letting the simple action explain everything that words couldn't. He nodded thoughtfully, then reached into his pocket. Her heart sank slightly. Another well-meaning person offering a few dollars before walking away. But instead of money, he pulled out a business card. "I own several restaurants in the city," he explained, handing her the card. "The one downtown, it used to have live music every evening. The pianist retired last month, and since then, something's been missing. The customers have noticed. I've noticed." She stared at the card, its elegant gold lettering catching the late afternoon sun. Her hands trembled slightly as she realized what he might be suggesting. "My mother was like you once," he continued, his voice taking on a softer tone. "An immigrant with nothing but her talent and determination. Someone gave her a chance, and that chance changed everything. Sometimes life works in circles like that." A city bus roared past, sending papers swirling around their feet. She watched them dance in the wind, her mind spinning with possibilities. Could this be real? After so many closed doors, could one finally be opening? "There's a piano in the restaurant," he said, checking his watch. "It's been quiet for too long. Would you like to try it out? Right now?" He gestured toward his car, then quickly added, "No pressure, no obligations. Just a conversation and maybe some music." She thought of her daughter at the daycare, of the promises she'd made this morning. I need to pick up my little girl by 6, she said hesitantly. His face brightened. Perfect. The daycare center run by the church. It's on our way. We can pick her up together, and she can have dinner while we talk. He smiled warmly. My wife always cooks enough to feed an army anyway. Standing there on that street corner, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Real, tangible hope. Not just the desperate kind that gets you through another day, but the kind that whispers of better tomorrows. She gathered her few belongings, including the cup of coins, a reminder of where this day had started. As they walked to his car, he spoke of music, of second chances, of believing that talent never goes to waste. The city continued its endless rush around them, but now it felt less hostile, less overwhelming. What had started as another day of survival was transforming into something else entirely. Sometimes, she would later tell her daughter, angels don't have wings. Sometimes they drive luxury cars and understand the power of a mother's love expressed through song. The restaurant was grander than anything she'd imagined. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across polished wood tables, and the aroma of gourmet cuisine filled the air. Her daughter clutched her hand tightly, eyes wide with wonder at the elegant surroundings. The restaurant owner led them to a quiet corner where his wife waited, her smile as warm as fresh bread from the oven. Please, sit, the wife said, gesturing to the chairs. You both must be hungry. As if on cue, 2 steaming bowls of soup appeared, brought by a waiter who seemed to materialize from thin air. Her daughter's eyes lit up at the sight of real food, not crackers or handouts, but a proper meal served on fine china. As they ate, the restaurant owner and his wife shared their own story. He spoke of arriving in the country with nothing but dreams and determination. His wife told of the tiny noodle shop they'd started, working 18-hour days, saving every penny. Life tests us all, she said softly, watching the little girl carefully blow on her soup. But it's not the test that matters, it's how we face it. Between spoonfuls of the best soup she ever tasted, she found herself opening up about her own journey. The words poured out like water from a broken dam, had years of teaching music, the joy she'd found in showing children the magic of melody. She spoke of the school's budget cuts, the desperate job searches, the slow spiral into homelessness. But you never stopped singing, the owner observed, his eyes thoughtful. Even when everything else was gone, you held on to your music. He glanced at the grand piano that stood silent in the corner, its polished surface reflecting the chandelier light. Would you play something for us? Her heart skipped a beat. It had been months since she'd touched a piano. Her fingers itched to feel the smooth keys, but doubt crept in. I'm not sure Mama, please. Her daughter whispered, soup forgotten. Like you used to at home. The wife gently took her daughter's hand. Come, little one, let's get you some dessert while your mother plays for us. They moved to a nearby table, giving her space but staying close enough to listen. She approached the piano slowly, running her fingers lightly across its surface. The owner pulled out the bench for her, and she sat down, taking a deep breath. The moment her fingers touched the keys, something inside her came alive. The melody flowed naturally, a song of hope and perseverance she'd learned long ago. As she played, the regular dinner crowd began filtering in. They paused, surprised by the music that had been missing for so long. She wove one song into another, adding her voice to the piano's notes. The restaurant grew fuller, but quieter, everyone listening to the story she told through music. Her daughter watched with proud eyes, remembering evenings at their old apartment when music had filled their home. The owner's wife dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, while her husband nodded in satisfaction, as if confirming something he'd known all along. When she finally stopped playing, the restaurant burst into applause. Several guests approached the owner, commenting on the beautiful music. She heard snippets of their conversations, just what this place needed, and reminds me of the old days, and will she be here regularly? The owner turned to her, his expression serious but kind. I think we need to talk about a permanent arrangement, he said, not just for the music, though that's important, but because sometimes talent needs a chance to grow roots again. He glanced at her daughter, who was happily finishing a bowl of ice cream. And because everyone deserves a place to call home. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of good food, kind hearts, and the lingering notes of music, she felt something shift inside her. The weight of hopelessness began to lift, replaced by the first real possibility of a new beginning. Her daughter's future, which had seemed so uncertain that morning, was suddenly full of promise again. The piano keys gleamed invitingly under the chandelier light, waiting for more music. Sometimes, she realized, rock bottom becomes the foundation for building something beautiful. The morning sun streamed through the window of their new temporary home, a small but clean apartment above the restaurant. 2 weeks had passed since that life-changing evening, and each day brought new reasons for hope. Her daughter sat at their small kitchen table, happily munching on breakfast cereal, a sight that still brought tears to her eyes. The restaurant owner had been true to his word, and then some. Not only had he offered her the position as the evening musician, but he also provided this apartment, explaining that many of his employees lived in the building. It's not charity, he'd insisted. It's investing in talent. You'll pay rent once you're back on your feet. Today marked another step forward. She'd be performing at all 3 of his restaurants on a rotating schedule. The news of her music had spread, and customers were specifically requesting to know which location she'd be at each night. Her tip jar, once filled with coins on a street corner, now collected enough each evening to start a small savings account. Her daughter was flourishing too. The restaurant owner's wife had arranged for her to attend the nearby elementary school, even helping with the paperwork and uniforms. "My mother did the same for me," she'd said simply when thanked. The little girl now spent her afternoons in the restaurant's office, doing homework and occasionally helping the staff fold napkins, earning proud smiles and small treats. As she prepared for her morning practice session, her phone buzzed, another new development, courtesy of her first paycheck. It was a message from the owner. "Meet me at the downtown location at 10, bringing someone you should meet." The downtown restaurant was the largest of the 3, with a stage rather than just a piano corner. When she arrived, she found the owner deep in conversation with an elegantly dressed woman. "This is the event coordinator for the City Arts Festival," he introduced. "She heard you play last week." The coordinator's eyes sparkled with interest. "Your voice is extraordinary," she said. "And your story? We're planning a benefit concert for arts education in underfunded schools. Would you be interested in performing? Your background as a former music teacher makes you perfect for this." Her heart raced at the opportunity. Teaching had been her passion, and the thought of helping other schools maintain their music programs struck a deep chord. Yes, absolutely," she managed to say. The owner beamed. "I told you she'd be perfect. And wait until you hear her new composition." He turned to her encouragingly. "Play it for us, the one you've been working on during morning practice." She settled at the piano, fingers finding the keys that had become familiar friends again. The melody she'd been crafting flowed out. A piece about falling and rising, about finding light in darkness, about the power of kindness to change lives. As she played, she could see her daughter smile, feel the weight of those desperate days on the street, and celebrate the miracle of where she sat now. When she finished, the event coordinator was wiping away tears. "That's it. That's our final piece for the benefit," she declared. "Would you consider teaching a master class during the festival as well? We have a youth program that could really benefit from someone with your experience." The owner placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "See? I told you talent always finds its way home. But it's not just your music, it's your heart. You never let go of hope, even in your darkest moments." Looking around the grand room where she now performed nightly, she thought about the street corner where she'd stood just weeks ago. The same voice that had sung for coins now filled this beautiful space, touching hearts and building a future. Her daughter would never know hunger again, and together they would help others find their way back from the edge. The morning light caught the crystal chandeliers, sending rainbow patterns dancing across the floor. In those colors, she saw all the possibilities ahead. Teaching again, performing at the festival, building a new life note by note. Sometimes, she realized, what looks like an ending is really just the opening melody of a beautiful new song. 6 months had transformed not just her life, but the entire restaurant group. The once quiet venues now buzzed with energy, drawing crowds who came as much for the music as for the food. She'd grown from performing solo to coordinating a small ensemble of musicians, other talented souls she'd met along the way who just needed a chance to shine. Her daughter had blossomed in their new life. The little girl who once huddled under a thin blanket at a bus stop now ran confidently through the restaurant kitchens, greeting staff by name, her backpack full of completed homework and art projects. The restaurant owner's wife had become like family, teaching the child to fold dumplings on quiet afternoons and sharing stories of her own childhood. One evening, as she finished a performance, the owner called her into his office. The space had become familiar over the months. She'd spent many hours here, planning music programs and discussing business ideas. But tonight felt different. His usual easy smile carried an air of excitement. "I've been watching how you've transformed our entertainment program," he began, gesturing for her to sit. "The way you've brought in new talent, organized the scheduling, built relationships with our customers, it's been remarkable." He paused, shuffling some papers on his desk. "I'd like to offer you a new position, entertainment director for all our locations." Her heart skipped a beat as he continued. "Full benefits, including health insurance for you and your daughter." And he smiled, a significant pay raise. "You've earned it, more than earned it." Tears welled in her eyes as she thought about how far she'd come. Just half a year ago, she'd been sitting on street corners, desperate for coins to buy food. Now she sat in an office, being offered a position that would secure her daughter's future. "There's more," he said, pulling out a business plan. "I want to expand our music program to other restaurants in the city. Many owners have approached me, asking how we created such a successful entertainment venue. I think there's an opportunity here, not just for business, but to help other musicians who might be struggling like you are." She leaned forward, looking at the plans spread across his desk. The idea of helping others who were where she had been stirred something deep inside her. "We could create a training program," she suggested, her mind already racing with possibilities. "Help talented musicians develop the skills to perform in upscale venues, teach them about the business side." The owner nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. And who better to lead this than someone who has lived it? Someone who understands both the artistic and human elements." He pulled out another document, a contract for a partnership stake in the new venture. Later that night, after tucking her daughter into bed in their now permanent apartment, she sat at their small kitchen table, looking at the contract. The words blurred as tears of gratitude fell. She thought of all the people who had helped them reach this point, the church volunteers who had watched her daughter, the kind street vendor who had given her coffee, the restaurant owner and his wife who had seen her potential beneath the desperation. Tomorrow, she would sign the contract. Tomorrow, she would begin building something that could help others find their way back from the edge. Tomorrow, she would start repaying the kindness that had saved her, passing it forward to others who needed it. But tonight, she simply sat in the quiet of her home, listening to her daughter's peaceful breathing from the next room, and marveled at how life could change so completely. The same hands that had once held out a cup for coins would now sign business contracts. The same voice that had sung on street corners would now guide others toward their dreams. 2 years had passed since that fateful day on the street corner. Now she stood on a different stage, the grand hall of the city's performing arts center. Behind her, a choir of 30 musicians, all graduates of her training program, prepared for their performance at the annual benefit for homeless families. Her daughter sat in the front row, now a confident third grader, beaming with pride. The restaurant owner and his wife sat beside her, no longer just employers but family in every way that mattered. The hall was packed with faces she recognized, restaurant customers who'd become friends, musicians she'd helped mentor, community leaders who'd supported their initiative. "When I first started this program," she began, her voice clear and strong, "someone asked me what makes a person keep singing when they've lost everything." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "The truth is, sometimes singing is all you have left. Sometimes it's the only way to tell your heart to keep beating, to tell your feet to keep moving, to remind yourself that you're still here." The spotlight felt warm on her face as she continued. 2 years ago, I stood on a street corner, singing for coins to feed my child. Today, our program has helped over 100 musicians find their way back from similar circumstances. We've placed performers in 30 restaurants across the city. We've created jobs, but more importantly, we've created hope." Behind her, the choir began to hum softly, the beginning of the song she'd written about her journey. The melody that had once been born of desperation had transformed into an anthem of resilience. Every person in this choir has a story, she gestured to the performers behind her. The woman who played violin in symphony orchestras before illness took her savings. The young man who fled war with nothing but his guitar. The mother of 3 who taught piano lessons until her students could no longer afford them. Each one thought their music had ended. Each one found their way back. As the choir's voices swelled, she moved to the piano. Her fingers found the keys. The same fingers that had once clutched a paper cup of coins now created magic on a grand piano. The song spoke of darkness and light, of falling and rising, of the power of kindness to change a life. In the audience, her daughter swayed to the music, eyes shining. The little girl who had once asked why they couldn't go home now had a different question: how many more people could they help? The benefit would raise enough money to expand their program to 2 more cities. The restaurant owner's vision of helping others had grown beyond anything they'd imagined. But more important than the money were the stories of lives rebuilt, of dignity restored, of music that refused to be silenced. As the final notes faded, she stood and faced the audience. Someone once told me that talent never goes to waste, it just waits for the right moment to bloom again. To everyone who's struggling right now, who thinks their song has ended, I say, keep singing. Your music matters. Your story isn't over. The applause that followed wasn't just for the performance, it was for every person who'd ever fallen and found the courage to rise again, for every dream that refused to die, for every act of kindness that changed a life. Later that night, as she tucked her daughter into bed, the little girl asked, "Mama, are you happy we're not on the street anymore?" She gathered her child close, breathing in the scent of shampoo and childhood. "Yes, baby. But you know what makes me happiest? That we can help other people find their way home too." Through their apartment window, the city lights twinkled like stars. Somewhere out there, another mother might be singing on a street corner, another child might be going to bed hungry. But tomorrow, they would continue their work, spreading hope one song at a time. Because sometimes, the most beautiful symphonies begin with a single note of courage.